Hey guys, welcome back. I wanted to do this video on a topic that is also one that gets discussed a lot. Um, this is it's another response to another question that I received from somebody that they bring up some great points, and I think their frustration is probably pretty common. I know myself, I've experienced this more than a few times. Um, but the topic is about Kihon. And what does that even mean? Well, you hear this, and this is the part that drives me insane too, is that people like to throw terms out all the time. And sometimes they do it because they want people to think they sound knowledgeable. But when you actually start to break down what that means, then there starts to become this weird kind of like this weird foggy inconsistent type of meaning of things that you can ask 10 different people what that means and get 10 different answers. So when you have 10 different types of value placed to one term, how much value does that term really have? It kind of becomes a diluted term. And the word Kihon really has kind of become like that. Um, oh, practice your Kihon, focus on the Kihon. And then we say, well, but what? Which Kihon? What do you mean by Kihon? It starts to get kind of weird. So let me start out by just reading this. I'm just going to summarize it real quick, and then I'll get into kind of the meat of what I want to talk about. I think you're going to find this really interesting, at least the way that I approach it, and with my students, how I approach it. It really kind of takes away some of that mystery and really applies good, logical, tangible definition that I think you might find helpful yourself. You may already know about this. I didn't make this up. This is stuff that I learned from my mentors and teachers, but I think you might find it helpful too. So let me get to this. Hey Darren, love your channel. Thank you for the support. I love all of the positive talk. But he then goes on to say, I've been training for a long time in different arts as well, and there's always this topic of Kihon that comes up. And in when I was taking karate, Kihon meant very specific things. When I started in the Bujinkan, they talked a lot about Kihon. We started training in Kihon, and my understanding at that time was the Kihon of the Bujinkan was the Kihon Happo and the Sanshin no Kata. Uh, but we would spend a lot of time training on punching and blocking and kicking drills and rolling and other types of things that were also called Kihon. And there seems to be a confusion as to what that actually is. And when I've talked to different people, they have told me different things, yet everybody agrees that the Kihon are the most important things. So, and then he goes on to say some other things, but ultimately what he's trying to ask is, what are the Kihon? What is the Kihon? So, let me start out by explaining this. I love using this analogy. Imagine a castle. If you've seen Japanese castles, you see how they're built. Some of them have been around for several hundred years. Um, they're beautiful, they're big, they're just an architectural genius how they're constructed. But the one thing they all have in common is they're all built on this foundation that's made up of perfectly placed rocks and bricks. And all the foundations are kind of built the same. But the Japanese knew that in order to have this big, beautiful castle, they needed to have a good foundation. And in order to have a good foundation, you had to have good material to build that foundation, and it couldn't just be thrown together. So much care was placed in that foundation. Um, you take modern house building, at least here in the US, the way houses are built, so much is spent on the foundation before they even put the first board on the ground. There's so much spent, the level of it, how it's bladed out, the type of earth that it is, how far they have to dig into the earth to reach that bedrock, to reach that solid core within the earth. They're not going to just throw a building up on a dirt hill. It's going to have this rooted foundation. And I like to use this in terms of describing the difference between Kihon and Kiso and how they're connected. So, Kihon, crudely defined, as basics, but they're not basic. They're not simple. In fact, they're extremely complex. But together, all the Kihon represent the Kiso. Kiso is your foundation. That's what you're building your castle on, is your foundation. So a lot of emphasis is placed on the Kihon, but sometimes I'm finding people confused. They think the Kihon is the Kiso. Or they'll call the Kihon your foundation or foundational. I think it's a little bit deeper than that. That the foundation is a result of proper Kihon. And that the way that I like to also explain it is that your Kiso, your foundation, is only going to be as strong as your weakest Kihon. Your foundation for your castle is only going to be as strong as your weakest brick. And thus, your castle, no matter how big it is, no matter how well it's built, it's only going to be as strong as the weakest brick in that foundation. So when you're talking about Kamae and Taijutsu and Kata, all of those are built on a foundation, and that foundation is only going to be as strong as the weakest Kihon or the weakest basic. And that is where I think the attention and training needs to be. It's not how many different kata can I learn. It's how deep can I go in my own basic. And is that depth, is that little granular piece I'm working on really actually reinforcing that foundation that I'm building my taijutsu on? Or is it something completely different? And this is part of what also I like to talk about as far as the relationship with Kihon, Kiso, and Taijutsu and what is that uh, when you're building that foundation for your castle, it's very important that you not only select the right bricks, but the construction of those bricks also becomes important. Is each brick made of clay? Is it made of rock? Is it made of sandstone? Does it have straw in it and pebbles and things like that? But also the shape of that. There has to be a particular shape because the better those bricks fit together, the more they all work together to strengthen as a whole that foundation. But if you have a bunch of randomly shaped bricks, those bricks can be constructed so well, made from all the best materials. But if the shapes are all random, you're going to have all these gaps and spaces between them. And then you're going to have to put filler in there, mud, cement, sand, whatever to fill that in. But whatever you're filling that with is not going to be as strong as that brick. So that's a weak point. Even though it might be a solid foundation, eventually that's going to wear away. Time, you might have pesky little ninjas carving away on your foundation. That even back in history, that was actually a battlefield tactic. Guys would sneak up and they would start chipping away at that to try to pull a rock out. They're not chipping the rock, they're chipping the stuff that's around the rock, the things that are between those rocks, because they know that that's weaker. And if they can get through on that, then it becomes easier. They can pull that rock out and then they can tunnel in or even insert explosives that can blow things up from the inside. This is all in our taijutsu, all comes out through our training that if we have these randomly shaped basics and we try to cram them together, we end up having to fill in the gaps with other things. And that's where other martial arts can come into play. That's where our own creative brain can kick on and we go, well, maybe I'll just step this way instead. And oh, now it works. Instead of Hicho no Kamae to begin my technique for Hicho no Kata, because it's hard to stay on one leg and I suck at my balance and I don't have my alignment right, I'm just going to stand with both feet on the ground. And then when the person attacks, I'm going to lift my rear or my front foot and do that kick. If that's what you're doing, all you're doing is just trying to patch holes with mud and sand. You're not actually trying to build that good brick so that they can all fit together and work together to form the foundation. A good, strong castle foundation, you see little to no gap. Those bricks are touching each other. They are there on each other. You have to understand that it's not just about the opponent. It's also time and evolution. That time withers away things. And the earth shifts and things move. And if your foundation is not strong for that, it's very temporary. You're going to run into health problems. If your Kamai and your Taijutsu is built upon the vigor of your youthfulness, that youthfulness goes away in time, and other things in your body also change over time. And if your foundation is not built correctly, those flaws start to come out, and you start to find that you start suffering, or you get injured, or you end up with knee problems and back problems and things like that. So you have to think longevity, not just effectiveness in the immediate solution, but how's this going to be 10, 20, 30 years from now? If I'm still moving and doing things this way, is that really going to help me? So the Kihon, in my opinion, are the bricks, but within those you have the Kihon no Kihon. You have the basics of the basics that represent the construction of those bricks, the materials used, how it's shaped, and it's not just its own piece. It's built that way in relationship with all the other ones so that they all work together in harmony to create that foundation. So when you're training and you're training on Kihon, and let's say you're training on Kihon Happo, that when you look at Kihon Happo, Kihon meaning basics, Happo, 8 principles, um, that you're really taking the Kihon no Kihon and you're applying it to the Kiso. So this is purely my opinion, but in my opinion, what constitutes Kihon Happo and the Sanshin are that's your foundation. That the Kihon of the Kihon Happo is the brick. That comes out in how your structure is, how your movement is, the way you use your body, the way you use your energy, making sure that your alignment is correct, that your head is in a certain spot, the rear foot is a certain way, the knees are turned a certain way, using your femurs to rotate to try to create that alignment. Um, Having a good committed mindset in the attack, or the way you receive, having a certain mindset, um, all these little things, the way your breath, how you use your breath, those are all the little things that come into play in your Kihon that make your Kihon effective or ineffective. That even just like a small alignment break in structure, even though the technique might still throw a guy or whatever, lock him up, or get your punch in there, but because your structure is off just that little bit, that's like that little bit of shift in the keyhole between the bricks. And if a guy is a quality martial artist, he's going to capitalize on that. Or if you're constantly training like that, and because your structure isn't correct, your connective tissues are having to bear the trauma of the force of the hit or the block or whatever, eventually that's going to cause injury. You're going to have scar tissue buildup and other micro tears that continue to contribute to further damage that later on down the road you end up with limited mobility now, or it could tear or something else. So my opinion, proper training approach in the Kihon should not just be this robotic, repetitious movement of Kihon Happo and other types of things. It's that it has to be a constant source of refinement. It has to be an inward process. You're going inward, like an archaeologist digs into the dirt, digs into the ground to uncover history. You're digging into your own movement and structure. And this requires very mindful practice and requires very good mentors and teachers, because we are not experts in this art right out of the chute. We don't come into this art already knowing everything. We have to learn. We learn from each other, we learn from our mentors and teachers, and then we reflect and apply this. And that's my whole point, is that when people talk about Kihon, Kihon are meant to be visited often. Often. There has to be this circle in your training, that you learn something and then you train, 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 and you gain this wisdom, this knowledge that comes from training, only to then return back to the beginning with this fresh perspective, this new perspective that you've gained from your experience and your knowledge. And then you come back to those very basic things and you start putting some more analysis to that. Maybe you need to relax your toes. Maybe you need to crimp your toes. Maybe there's a little bit of shifting on the feet that need to happen. Maybe you need to learn how to let go a little bit with your forward knee so that your gravity can then pull you into your motion instead of you pushing off the rear foot, causing your foot to maybe slip, or that you're having to flex before you move because you're doing a fire up burst type movement instead of allowing natural motion to happen. The alignment of the body, maybe you're not positioning the shoulders and hips correctly so that you're maximizing the linear alignment that you need. You're leaving vital targets open when you move. Your head is off alignment. You're moving too circular, so your balance is being shifted off in your movement. Um, all of this type of stuff requires this constant return, this constant analysis. And that is Kihon. That's, in my opinion, what Kihon training should be. It's not just this repetitious motor function of the same technique over and over and over again, whether it's Kihon Happo, Sanshin no Kata, or whatever. It's not this repetitious motion. It's a constant refinement, like a like a sculptor chipping away to reveal the beauty of what he's trying to design. Sculptors don't add, they take away. And that's what we are really trying to do in our taijutsu. We can add with knowledge, but honestly, it's about taking away the unnecessary, taking away the bad forms, the bad habits, and getting to a state of purity in our movement that makes us connect to the bigger taijutsu, the castle, that what you're doing cannot just be something in the immediate. It has to connect you to what's later. And this is also the important part of Kihon. Kihon have to be links in the chain. They have to be things that when you connect to the other Kihon together, the shapes fit perfectly together to make that good foundation to build your castle on, so that whether you are punching, kicking, blocking, using a sword, using a spear, throwing a shuriken, whatever. It's the same. Those Kihon all work with that. It's the same thing. That you're not just filling in patches with things that later on down the road in your training suddenly become a problem. You're trying to really, really improve from the very beginning and then return back, because you're going to identify those bricks that maybe were not made as well, maybe they're not shaped as well, and that's your opportunity to pull that, fix it, make a new one, whatever, and then put it in there just right, make it fit. Constantly doing that in your training so that everything else that follows that gets stronger. Exponential growth. You make one investment in one Kihon, it exponentially improves everything else that you're doing. Because if you're training correctly, and I know there's arguments about what constitutes correct training, in my opinion, training correctly means everything connects to everything else. So if you change one thing, it's affecting everything else in the chain. That if you make that one little improvement in your Kihon, turn that foot just a quarter inch or whatever, you make that one change, it will improve everything else. That's Kihon. In my opinion, that should be your focus. So when people say practice Kihon, that's what it is. It's not go practice Kihon Happo. It's through Kihon Happo, you are going to improve your Kihon, because your Kihon is really what you're practicing on. Kihon Happo just becomes the framework, the foundation for you to work on those little parts. And keep going granular, keep getting smaller and smaller. Not using your creative brain to think about things and go, well, I should do this. It's okay to experiment, but really seek out the advice of people more experienced than you, that are on the right training path. There's a lot of people that are more experienced, but it may not be the kind of experience that's going to really help you. Um, but really try to work on getting more granular in your training, and let that be the driving force, this obsessiveness almost, constant improvement. There's an old karate master, Funakoshi. very, very well known. And when he was dying and he was on his deathbed, it is said that in his last hours, he was still trying to perfect the punch. He was still trying to perfect the punch. That that level of devotion is unheard of in martial arts today. But that's that's true mastership. That is true devotion, discipleship, mastership. That's high level stuff. If that's your mindset in your training, you're going to go granular. You're going to go to the smallest details. It's not going to be about some new technique or flashy this and that. And, you're going to really, really dig deep in yourself about how you yourself can improve the smallest details because you know that every little detail, no matter how micro it is going to positively improve everything else that you're doing. You could know 10,000 techniques and you improve that one detail, you just improved 10,000 techniques. So that's what I encourage you to do. Stop being confused. Get back to the basics. The basics being the Kihon, but the Kihon being the micro movements, the little things in the chain that make that technique work, but also connects you to everything else, like the bricks that are there. And if you're using patches, it's time for you to start figuring out that maybe this brick is not meant for this wall. Maybe this brick is not meant for this foundation. That maybe I need to remove that and find the right one, or maybe I need to reconstruct that brick in a way that actually is meant to go in that spot. So I hope you find this helpful, enlightening in some way. I hope this encouraged you, maybe confused you. Uh, Thank you for the great comments and messages. I really appreciate it. I kind of like doing these emails or these videos based on messages I receive. If I get any more, I'll hop on and add some comments to that. Uh, but I really encourage you to take this time to just go into your own self-exploration. Take a look at where your weak bricks are within yourself. It could be your mindset. It could be the way you move, how you hold yourself, gaps in knowledge or whatever. I'm sure it's a combination of all of that. And it's that way for all of us because nobody's ever perfect. Nobody's got the perfect foundation, the perfect Kihon. We're all in this constant kaizen, this constant state of improvement. But the difference is that there are people that settle for good enough. It's good enough. They don't. You do that, you're just limited yourself. You're setting yourself up. A true martial artist is passionate, is never going to settle for good enough. So I'm going to leave you with that. Again, thank you. And as I always say, stay happy, stay healthy, keep training.